When I was in middle school, I was a huge fan of a series of unfortunate events. I never took to Harry Potter, or honestly, who cares about the rest? Harry Potter was all anyone was reading back then, and I couldn't get into it. I never saw the appeal of Harry Potter. But a series of unfortunate events was different. Right from the jump, this story was engaging to me. I was actually a fan of this series for a few years. And despite all the awful things I'm about to say about this series, despite all the things that are going to happen in this video, and there will be things, as a middle schooler and even early on in high school, I was engaged in the series all the way up to the final book, which came out when I was 17 years old. In retrospect, too old to be reading this series, because I just wanted to know how it all ended. But then it ended. Yeah, it ended. And if you're watching this video, you know how it fucking ended. I remember the ending of this series being the first time I felt betrayed by a writer. And the first time it happens to you as a kid, it's awful. No kid, not even a teenager, wants to feel like they wasted their life yet. But a couple years later, I started doubting myself. I thought maybe I missed something. So when I was maybe 19 or 20, I reread the entire series. All 13 books, plus the unauthorized autobiography and the Beatrice letters, and nope, still dog shit. Still absolute poo-poo dog shit. But reading the series as a whole this time felt different. I was 19 or 20 at this point, and my tolerance for bullshit wasn't as high as it was when I was a kid. So I came to a startling conclusion. A series of unfortunate events is a terrible, broken series. Not just the ending, the whole series. There is just so much wrong with this story, the way it's presented to us, that I don't know where to begin. And it's a shame because there was a good story with real potential hiding somewhere underneath the story we actually got. And I'm going to explain that. I'm also going to explain why, as an adult, I think Daniel Handler is one of the douchiest, most pretentious, patronizing, a word which here means condescending, children's authors to ever put ink on a page. This is the story of how I invested time into something and got absolutely nothing for it. This is the story of an inept and frankly morally fucked up pseudo-intellectual author who decided he could write books for children one day. This is the story of the real series of unfortunate events. Not the ones that happened to the Baudelaires, oh no. This is about a series of events that brought myself and a lot of other readers on a crash course towards the worst ending in the history of children's literature, and the shitty road that took us there. Quick note, spoilers for the whole fucking series. Also, I'm only talking about the books. This is not a review of the movie or show. Also, I'm going to nip one thing in the fucking bud right now. The argument people make for a lot of shit that they like that is bad, and that's the argument of it's just for kids. It's the same argument people made about the Mario Brothers movie, and my response to that was this. If it's just for kids, why did you, a grown adult, go to see it? Because if you got dragged to see it by your kids and didn't like it, something tells me you wouldn't be posting your opinion about it on the internet after. And I know most of you watching this don't have kids. You didn't get dragged to see it, so be real with me. Yes, this series' main demographic is kids. You know what other books were targeted towards kids and don't suck? This one, this one, this one, this one. A lot of the books written by this guy, and a lot of the books written by this guy. But before we get there, do I have anything good to say about these books? Well, the premise is decent. 3 orphans being relentlessly chased by a crazed murderer who wants their fortune and they need to outsmart him. That works for a kid's series. That doesn't work for 13 books straight, but as a kickoff, it works. This series was probably the most successful case of a book series being sold on reverse psychology of all time. On the back of each book, Lemony Snicket would tell us, hey, trust me, you don't want to read this. Bad things happen in this book, and it totally worked on us. This got us to want to read them shits. Also, Brett Hellquist is a great illustrator, and if there is one person, place, or thing involved with or associated with this series that I have absolutely nothing bad to say about, it's him. His art style is a perfect fit for the tone of these books. Talk all the shit you want on him for redrawing scary stories. If you follow this channel, you know I think that that's bullshit. But hey, that's not really his fault. In that line of work, you take a paycheck when it's offered to you. Can't fault the guy for that. Yes, I'm aware that Lemony Snicket is actually Daniel Handler, but Lemony Snicket is also the persona that Handler speaks through when writing these books. I haven't read a Daniel Handler book, so I'm not sure if this is how he writes for adults. But one of the biggest blows to this series is that Lemony Snicket writes like a pretentious douchebag. He is intrusive to the point where it ruins the story. That shit he does where he'll use a big word, then say a word which here means, and then define it for us like we're children. I hated that shit rereading these books. And I can already hear you saying, but Plebe, this is a book series for children. Well, okay, but this book's target audience isn't little kids. It's middle schoolers. There's murder and mayhem in these books, and Lemony Snicket is writing down to the reader like a kindergartner. And even in middle school, I kinda hated that aspect of these books. And also, is that really the target demographic? Because every single character and place, and honestly, every proper noun in the entire fucking series, are literary references to shit that's not for kids. Go ask a middle schooler if they've ever heard of Charles Baudelaire, or if they've ever read For Esme with Love and Squalor. If they said yes, they're either lying or getting the shit kicked out of them in school every day. Every time a new character is introduced in these books, it's like reading the book version of the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Just references for the sake of references. And yes, apparently books can do it just like movies do, and it works about the same. It doesn't. Take Dr. Georgina Orwell, for instance. There is absolutely nothing she has in common with George Orwell or his books. At all. Daniel Handler just named her after him for no reason. So these books were marketed towards the age 9 through 13 crowd, and I promise you, they did not age with the readers, because although Snicket's writing gimmicks get more annoying as the series goes on, the final book is not dramatically different in tone from the first. However, Snicket's literary references are something only adults would catch, and have about as much depth as the references in a live-action Disney remake, and clearly only exist to show off how well-read the author is, because they're all surface level and don't even have the depth required to count as illusions. And on top of that, Snicket writes down to the reader in a condescending manner like they're a 5-year-old. So, which fucking demographic is this series really for? Then there's the tangents. Like, bro, I don't want to hear about the fucking water cycle. He has no idea how to show not tell. He tells all. Then there are times where he inserts his political opinions into the later books, which is so fucking cringe. This is cringe in any book, but in a children's book? Ew. Like, he literally had Sonny, the baby character, make a reference to Bush and Cheney. Like, what are you fucking doing? Alright, now that we've pointed out Lemony Snicket for possessing shitty writing skills, pretty much the worst foot forward you can take when deciding to write something, why don't we examine the characters? Before we get to the Baudelaires, I have to talk about something even fans of this series admit. The adults in this story are fucking retarded. I understand that this is all made to represent how it feels to be a kid telling an adult something and they don't believe you, and that can be captured very well when done right. And if it had just been one character, like say Mr. Poe, that would have been fine. Making Mr. Poe this stupid makes sense because for the first half of the story, he's in control of where the Baudelaires wind up. He controls their fate. Just having him be stupid would be a great way of showing how helpless they are. But I swear to God, there are only like 4 adult characters in this entire story who aren't morons. And it becomes so grating because the Baudelaires are not as smart as this series thinks they are. These 3 kids have no personality aside from the defining characteristics that get them through the story. Violet invents shit. Klaus knows every random fact that the plot requires him to know. And Sonny, we're gonna get to Sonny. But like, what else do we actually know about these kids? That they're allergic to peppermints? The Baudelaires just don't feel like kids. Like, they don't ever talk about any other things they did before they were orphaned. It's the same thing with the Quagmires. Oh, Duncan's a journalist. Isadora is a poet. Quigley is a cartographer? A cartographer. A fucking cartographer. Daniel Handler sure is down with the kids. A cartographer. By the way they're written, if I ever met these kids in real life, I'd hate them. Like, imagine you're in middle school and you met Klaus Baudelaire. You'd have nothing in common with him. Even if you liked books, Try discussing your favorite book with him. He doesn't even read fiction, he reads encyclopedias. The kids in this series are a bunch of learned, rich kids who might mean well, but in real life would not be able to relate to normal kids in any way, shape, or form. They're a bunch of sheltered private school weirdos whose knowledge of the outside world only came from the books they read before they were thrust into it. They're not relatable, and in a story for children where you want kids to care about your main characters, you want them to be somewhat relatable. I'd also like to point out that for being so goddamn smart, the Baudelaires sure are fucking stupid. You know, when the plot needs them to be. Like, you're gonna tell me Violet can invent grappling hooks and Klaus knows every random fact? But these idiots didn't stop and think that maybe something was up when Count Olaf separated them from Sonny and made them ride in the caravan behind his car. Like, they have all these skills except for basic human intuition. Not to mention, as the series goes on, Violet's inventions get more and more outlandish. She dissolves a jail wall using a loaf of bread soaking up water, and she slows down a speeding caravan that she's inside of using hammocks and condiments which Klaus names in detail while the caravan is speeding downhill to their deaths. And then there's that thing Klaus invents, where he pulls a big-ass log out of the way using chewing gum. Now, this story is clearly defined as taking place in its own universe, not exactly ours, but it is meant to be realistic. Suspension of disbelief is very important in a story like this. Like a species of mushroom or leech or reptile that doesn't exist in real life, I'm fine with those. The Duchess of Winnipeg, the King of Arizona, I'm fine with those. This is an alternate universe. I'm cool with this. But pulling a log off of a conveyor belt with chewing gum, or knocking a jail cell wall down, after dissolving its mortar with water and a loaf of bread in the span of a few hours, this kind of shit breaks that reality. But not as much as the character who really, really brings the reader out of the story. And that character is Sonny. I absolutely hate Sonny Baudelaire. I think the series would have benefited greatly if they had aged her up or just erased her altogether. Sonny completely breaks any believability this story has. Her only defining characteristic for the first 9 books in the series is that she has sharp teeth. And that's it. And you know, she's a baby, I get it, but then, wait, hold on, Sonny gets into a sword fight with her teeth. She climbs up an elevator shaft with her teeth. And she's super intelligent for a baby, and none of this is ever explained. We're just supposed to be like, oh yeah, in this universe a baby has superpowers, when Sonny is the only character shown to have these kinds of superpowers. There's no other babies in this entire series. Like, do babies just have superpowers in this world? Did Violet and Klaus have superpowers when they were babies? Do the sharp teeth run in the Baudelaire family? The suspension of disbelief in this series is high, and in some ways I get it, but a baby getting into a sword fight with her fucking face, when no other character is doing shit like this, pulls me out of the story like a motherfucker. Ironically, Sonny is the only Baudelaire who actually gets a fucking character arc. She learns how to cook? Okay. Oh, also Sonny does something insanely evil in the 12th book. Like, genuinely fucking evil, but we'll get to that. But the biggest reason the Baudelaires are so unbelievably dumb are because there are multiple moments in this series where they could easily physically overpower Count Olaf and prevent a whole lot of bad shit from happening, and they just don't. There's 3 of you. 2 of you are able-bodied teenagers, and 1 of you is a baby that can fight off a sword and climb up elevator shafts with her teeth. Was there not a single point in the entire series where they could have overpowered this guy, tied him up, and then called the police? He's been a wanted criminal since the first book. I also haven't spoken about Count Olaf too much here because, well, I actually think he's the closest any character in the series comes to being well-written. That's not to say that he is well-written, and I think he gets worse and worse as the series goes on, but he's pretty fucking menacing in the beginning of the series. Remember how the bad beginning ends? What he says to Violet before he runs away? It's a shame we rarely ever got a threat like that from this character again. And I think the reveal that the Baudelaire's parents murdered his parents could have been one of the greatest twists ever in the hands of a competent author who actually did something with that information. But Count Olaf's whole shtick with getting the Baudelaire's fortunes, his disguises and plots to adopt them, something is off about that. Now, you might think, hey, no one cares about these kids enough to pay the ransom if he kidnaps them. That's why he goes through all this bullshit to inherit their money. But then why the fuck does he just kidnap the fucking Quagmires? He doesn't do any of that shit to inherit their fortune, he just fucking kidnaps them. So what was the point of any of this other stuff that he does with the Baudelaires? Much of a series of unfortunate events is the same thing over and over again. Books 2 through 7 actually are literally the same thing over and over again. New Guardian, Count Olaf in disguise, he tries to adopt them, they foil his plans. Books 8 through 12, with the exception of book 10, are also the same thing over and over again, with the Baudelaires, usually in disguise, having some sort of surrogate guardian giving them tasks to complete, and Count Olaf sorta just lingering there. It's fucking dumb. Now, in each of these books, the Baudelaires have to invent, research, or bite their way out of all their problems, and the focus is put primarily on them, and this gets tedious. So tedious. But at the end of the 5th book, there is finally a new plot element introduced. VFD. VFD suddenly became the driving force behind these books, and for me as a kid, especially after reading the autobiography, VFD was the thing I wanted answers to the most. Yeah, back then I still cared about the main story, I mean, I'd invested time into it, but this was the thing that was keeping me hooked now. All of the books in the second half of this series started to drop major clues about VFD in between bouts of the Baudelaires and Count Olaf doing the same old shit to each other that they had been for every book. But VFD intrigued the fuck out of me. It felt like it would tie everything together, and I wasn't the only one. Every Lemony Snicket fan site around this time became dedicated to uncovering the secrets of VFD. The kids who had started reading the series now had a reason to keep reading it, and the biggest thing that kicked this off was Lemony Snicket, the unauthorized autobiography. The autobiography, I gotta say, if this counts as part of the series, then it is by far the best book in the entire series. The autobiography is the least annoying thing Snicket ever wrote, is written in this strange cryptic style that actually works for him, and without actually telling us what VFD stands for, he actually gives us more insight into the organization than we ever got in the main series. Things that become really important in books 8 through 12 are first mentioned here. The Schism, the Sugar Bowl, the Survivor of the Fire. All of these characters we'd already met were in VFD. Suddenly, this series had potential. A series of unfortunate events was no longer a series about the Baudelaire orphans. Now the story was way bigger than them. Except no, it wasn't. The rest of the main series was a bunch of the same shit with a hint or two dropped here and there to tantalize us, and that's it. This series never fully answered any of our questions about VFD or the story of the Schism. The closest we ever got was in The Slippery Slope, which when I was a kid was actually my favorite main entry in the series, because it's the only book that ever answered some of the questions from the autobiography. We learn the survivor of the fire is Quigley, which I called before this book came out, and that VFD stands for Volunteer Fire Department. As far as the books themselves, I'm not going to spend too much time on each individual book. They're very samey. Yeah, I don't know, I guess the first two are the least bad, objectively. They don't repeat things as much. Count Olaf is still menacing in both of these books. The Slippery Slope, again, was my favorite as a kid, but that's because that's the one we really came closest to finding out anything about VFD in. The Miserable Mill and the Grim Grotto are just filler dog shit. If you remove the mill from the series, it would have absolutely no bearing on it, and the only thing that happens in the grotto that matters is the Medusoid mycelium. But then, something happens in the 12th book. Something big enough to actually bring up. So in the few books leading up to this, Handler tries to do this thing that he thinks is deep, where he makes the Baudelaires do things that make them feel scummy in order to survive. Stealing some keys in the hospital, disguising themselves at the carnival, making that trap for Esme, etc. And none of this stuff is evil. These are things they needed to do in order to survive. Then, in the penultimate peril, there is a part where they very clearly, accidentally, kill Dewey Denouement with a harpoon gun. It is clearly stated that this was an accident, and this makes the Baudelaires feel awful and question their morals, etc. But remember, this was an accident. And then, at the climax of the book, they're in a laundry room. It's the three of them, Count Olaf, and Justice Strauss. Count Olaf threatens to poison everyone with the Medusoid, and the Baudelaires need to signal Kit that the meeting is canceled. There is an adult, two able-bodied teenagers, and a baby that could take down a gazelle with her teeth in this room with Count Olaf. And instead of just fucking grabbing him and taking him to court, Sonny figures that the only way out of this situation is to burn the hotel the fuck down. And they all agree with her. Without any deserved buildup, Again, the Baudelaires did what they did to survive up until this point, and Dewey's death was an accident. Sonny, out of nowhere, goes, "We're already evil, might as well go full ham." Out of fucking nowhere. And that's what they do. They start a fire in the laundry room on the ground floor and just attempt to tell everyone to escape from within the confines of the elevator, while Olaf tells them that it's a false alarm and everyone is still blindfolded. The Baudelaires just murdered hundreds of people in an attempt by Daniel Handler to add some moral gray to what was a pretty clear-cut black and white story. And it's completely fucking unearned. This fucking hack writer just fucked up any sympathy we could have had for these kids, and fucked up whatever remaining flow of logic existed up until this point. Was signaling VFD to stay away from the hotel really more important than the lives of hundreds of people? Yeah, some of them have been less than kind to the Baudelaires, but some of them tried to help these kids, and most of the people in this hotel we don't even see. They could be people just staying in a fucking hotel who don't even know any of this is happening. But the worst book in the entire series, and the one that made me and everybody else go, "My God, I've wasted my life," was the end. The final book in the series, a phrase which here means Daniel Handler's chance to wrap everything up and make some semblance of an okay ending. It did not do any of that. I mean, for starters, the actual story we get in the book at face value is bullshit. Every character who is in the rest of the entire series dies or disappears at the end of the 12th book. So most of the characters in this one are completely new. The kids have a chance to push Count Olaf overboard and decide not to, because that would be going too far or some shit, as if they didn't just murder a bunch of innocent people in the fucking hotel. Count Olaf gets killed by a character we just fucking met, and it's dropped that they have history together, but so did every other character in the whole series. Everyone had history with Olaf. Then they try to do this thing where he loved Kit Snicket, and the Baudelaires take a moment of silence at his grave. Are you fucking serious? And here's the mysteries that were never answered at the end of the end. What the fuck happened to the Quagmires? The airship crashed into the submarine and the question mark ate them? We never get a follow-up to the Baudelaires killing Count Olaf's parents. No backstory, no context. Was that his motivation? What the fuck? It's never addressed again. This could have been an amazing revelation that explains why Count Olaf burned down the Baudelaire mansion. Another thing that is highly inferred, even brought up, but never directly addressed or answered afterwards. The Baudelaires themselves finally do put two and two together and straight up say, "You're the reason we're orphans," and Olaf doesn't even respond to this. He basically just turns and winks at the camera. Like, we've known this since the 6th book. The Underground Passage? Any child with half their brain not missing would immediately make this connection. You couldn't bring this up earlier? You couldn't have Olaf confirm it? And the Sugar Bowl. The fucking Sugar Bowl. The driving force of this story for 3 entire fucking books. And hey, you know what was in the Sugar Bowl? Because I sure fucking don't, and neither did Daniel Handler. He wrote himself into a corner with this fucking Sugar Bowl, just like he did with everything else in the story, and burned it all down in the 12th book so that in the 13th book, the story could conclude on some fucking island with a bunch of new characters who we've never seen before. And wait, hold on. What even happened to the Baudelaires? Because remember the Beatrice letters? Which takes place after the end, and it's inferred that they went missing in some kind of shipwreck, and it's not in the boat they leave the island in because the younger Beatrice talks about them as adults, so this must have happened sometime in the future. How did they get out of being wanted for murder? Which by the end of the story, they actually did commit. There was a good story hiding somewhere in the one we got, and VFD was that story. And it's a story Daniel Handler clearly cared about for a time, and then realized he had no idea how to fully tie it in or finish it. So he just dropped everything and gave up. One other mystery that Snicket did answer at the very end of the final book was that Beatrice was the Baudelaire's mother. And you can tell that he thought this twist was the coolest idea he'd ever had in his entire life. And this wasn't a twist. This was not a twist at the end of this series. The people who were reading these books as they were being released knew this since at least the 8th book. Remember the anagrams in the hostile hospital? It didn't take long for fans of this series to figure out that one of them spelled Beatrice Baudelaire, and that shit was all over the internet in the early 2000s at the height of these books' popularity. Handler spoiled his own fucking twist ending around the halfway point of this series. For the last 5 books of this series, we already knew the big twist. And he tried to play it off before that by having characters mention Beatrice by name in front of the kids, and they don't react at all. Which could have thrown the reader off and given them enough time to change who Beatrice was, so we could still have a genuine twist, and then Beatrice was still their mom. So what was with not reacting to people mentioning your mother by first name? Gee, it's almost like Jackass here wrote himself into a corner, played around with the idea of escaping, then just said, nah, fuck it. Beatrice is their mom. Worst ending ever. Now, this does raise an interesting question. Was Daniel Handler trying to troll us? No, this isn't a troll. Lemony Snicket was not his Facebook alt. This series was sincerely written by a guy who was not only trying to write a good story, but because of his ego, I can tell for a fact that he sincerely thought he was writing a good story. Daniel Handler wrote this series with sincerity. The series got him a movie deal and a TV deal. You can tell he thought he was hot shit while writing it. The last part of the series I'd like to talk about are some of the lessons Daniel Handler tries to impart to his readers. I don't think all children's stories need lessons or a moral, but I'm a firm believer that if your balls are big enough to think you're capable of teaching children life lessons, you should make them good ones. Now, the biggest lesson this series tries to teach kids is very obvious. Bad things happen to good people. And I recall this being one of this series' selling points when I was a kid. And for most of the series, although the Baudelaires are unbelievably one-dimensional, they are also undeserving of the things that are happening to them. Until the ending of the 12th book. Like, what the fuck? What lesson were you trying to teach? What point were you trying to make? That if you have to do some dishonorable things to survive, or if you kill someone by accident, completely by accident, that makes you evil and gives you carte blanche to commit fucking mass murder? Like, could you imagine if Aladdin stole that loaf of bread and then instead of sharing it with those kids decided to just shoot them in the face? What? He stole, right? So that makes him evil. Might as well do some shit that's way worse. But there's another, much more insidious lesson in these books. And this is the part of the video where things get personal and, frankly, a little dirty. Because now I have to talk about the man who wrote this series. And I don't usually do this, but in order to get a full scope of every bad thing I have to say about this series, it's important to talk about the man who wrote it. There are several moments in this story that actually made me question who this guy was, and who he thought he was. And this goes beyond him being a bad writer. Everything I've talked about so far was an attack on the man as an author, not on the man himself. Because I don't like doing that. But this is different. Because this man put one of the shittiest moral lessons of all time in a story for children, and it really provides a window into what kind of guy he is. Daniel Handler wrote a story for children where multiple characters literally say that people who are not well read or don't have time to read are evil. And I have a serious fucking problem with that. That is not a thing you should be sincerely conveying to kids, because that is fucking wrong. Nobody should be putting a lesson like this in a story for children. Not everyone has time to read. People have lives. Ask anyone with children how much time they have to read. For themselves, not to their kids. Could you imagine a kid reading these books and thinking their parents are evil because they don't have time to read books? Oh, I'm sorry, Junior, you're right, I don't have time to read. I've been too busy putting a roof over your head and food on the fucking table to read a goddamn book. Guess that makes me evil. I'm so evil for working 40 hours a fucking week so I can afford to buy you these bullshit books where the author tells you that all people who aren't intellectuals are morally bankrupt. Hey, Handler, you want to see a picture of a guy who read a lot and even wrote his own book? Here's him as a baby. Here's another guy who wrote a book of poetry when he was a young man. The notion that well-read people are less likely to be evil is fucking awful and speaks volumes about the kind of person Daniel Handler is. This is the kind of opinion that could only be formed by an intellectual douchebag. If anything, well-read people are more likely to be evil. Well-read people are less likely to be ignorant, you could certainly make that argument. And trust me, if you've ever seen my reactions to the comments I've gotten on some of these videos, you know I'm fucking savage when someone writes something incomprehensible. But ignorance and evil are two different things, and the evil people at the top are always more well-read than the ignorant masses who they control. And this lesson doesn't even fit into the context of the story. There's a part in this story where Olaf doesn't know how to spell poison, but then it's revealed that he's actually well-read and even likes and recites poetry. And then Lemony Snicket shits on him for this. So which is it? Is Olaf an ignoramus who doesn't read, or is he an ignoramus because he just likes Edgar Guest? Because it can't be both. And reflecting on all this made me realize for the first time that I actually fucking hate VFD. They're a bunch of rich, elitist, intellectual snobs who are obsessed with libraries and accumulation of knowledge and do absolutely nothing with that knowledge, nothing to benefit society at large. VFD is a glorified book club, and whatever knowledge they accumulate, they keep to themselves and don't share it with anyone outside their social circle. The only things we know about them are that they're all extremely wealthy, they dislike fire, though we don't actually ever see them put fires out themselves, and they spend most of their time murdering each other over the schism that happened within their organization. A schism that isn't well defined because Daniel Handler didn't think that far ahead. For all their highfalutin talk of being kind and noble and well-read, I don't recall a single member of VFD ever donating to a charity or adopting foster kids or giving a homeless guy half their sandwich in any of these fucking books. And I'm not trying to make the argument that people with money owe society any of those things. They don't. You have the right to do whatever you want with your money. But it's kind of hard to make a reader feel sympathy for the adults in VFD when your only way of portraying them as good and noble and kind is by just calling them good and noble and kind. Everything we learn about VFD and Daniel Handler's own opinions on reading and being well-read that he inserts into the story tell me that the lesson he wanted to convey to readers is that if you don't read a lot, you won't amount to nothing. Read a lot and you can be in my elitist intellectual social circle and judge people who read less than you. And that's a dogshit thing to teach kids, or anyone, but especially kids. Daniel Handler is a fucking snob. But the irony is that for being so well read, he wrote a book series that doesn't adhere to the tenets of good storytelling 90% of the time. He created a persona that talks down to his readers and inserts himself into the story way too much. He wrote a whole bunch of books that are the same exact plot over and over again. He introduces a backstory and several really important plot elements that he just fucking abandons when he realizes that he didn't have a plan for them. His characters' personalities, actions, and abilities are completely inconsistent with who they are, or within the context of the world he built around them, or within the context of logic in general, and he tries to shoehorn unearned moral lessons into the story that are not consistent with any of the actions the characters have taken. So tell me, Daniel, in the long run, how did all that book learning even help you write this fucking series? Well-read people are less likely to be evil? Bullshit. The only thing Daniel Handler ever taught me is that well-read people aren't even more likely to be good writers. Get fucked, you pretentious douchebag. A phrase which here means, get fucked, you pretentious douchebag. Folks, thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, Patreon link is in the description. Special thanks to 1-Star Reviews, whose review of this series actually helped me remember some things about it. A link to part 1 of her review is in the description as well.